Modern has had many descriptions over time, one of two ships passing in the night, a sideboard format, and heck, even a drag race of an archetype soup. And in many ways, I've thought to that drag race analogy as to be more fitting to it, where a bunch of engine cards come together to speed up the archetype or your plan more and more. In many ways, it feels like vintage light, where you have a bunch of powerful cards coming together to create an overwhelming odd, and you might find some interaction here and there. Maybe your cars bump into each other or something, but largely you're just trying to get faster than your opponent. And with the increase in gameplay on the channel, I hope y'all have had your appreciation for that. I've come to appreciate different engines in the modern format, namely playing Modern Affinity and also Legacy Painter. I've come to appreciate Urza Saga. And in today's video, I wanted to go over some targets for Urza Saga that are very underappreciated, cards that obviously don't see play for a variety of reasons, but have their picks in certain metagames. Cards that I want to remind y'all are targets to keep in your pocket for when certain archetypes just, you know, take their way to the top 10 of a metagame, or enough to maybe they're enough represented at your LGS where you might want to include something like this. So buckle up, let's talk about Urza Saga, some of the more common targets, why we pick those targets, and also why we want to pick some of these newer targets. Now, if you want to see more videos like this talking over engine cards in Modern, then leave a like on the video. Let me know what you want me to talk about. Of course, subscribe for some more constructed musings. Now, Urza Saga, I think many of you are already well aware of what this card does. Very much a powerhouse, not only in Modern, but in Legacy and in Vintage for many reasons, other than the fact that the Power 9 is legal there. Now, Urza Saga, an enchantment land, so obviously, easily removed by enchantments. Blood Moon instantly removes this off the field, removing its types. And then the first lore counter on it turns it into a land. You can tap for colorless. As soon as you're on kind of 2, you can then tap 2 other, get 2 other mana, tap this, create a construct token. So you have this kind of creation of uncounterable threats, which is really relevant, especially in Legacy and in Vintage with Force of Will. Having uncounterable threats is really important, but obviously those formats have like Wasteland. Vintage has Strip Mine as well. In the third mode, this is the most important mode. So in many ways, and again, I've mentioned this in previous videos where I think Bosch and Roll actually talked about this really well, where the artifact that you grab with Urza Saga, it's almost like when you play Urza Saga, you're putting a random artifact of your choice into a suspend mechanic, right? You suspend it by 2. In many ways, you will get the card you need at that time, suspend 2. And what's nice about it is you don't actually have to hard commit to a certain target because it's suspend 2, because it's a tutor on turn 3, you can grab it. The whole idea is that the downside is it's suspend 2. It takes 2 turns for you to tutor out that card. And again, in an uncounterable fashion. Once you get to older formats, again, mentioning Legacy and Vintage, you have stifle effects. You do have those in Modern, it's just not as commonly relevant. In Legacy, you have whole archetypes like Stifle Knot, so you have cards that are more well known in those archetypes. When it comes to searching a library for an artifact, you have some common pieces, you have protection pieces, cards that give you haste, lifelink, Mox Opal more recently unbanned, so this card has seen an increase in relevancy with recent unbans. So again, that respect for it I have has only further increase. Now, when you come to Modern, there's 2 main decks that I would point to. These aren't the only Urza Saga decks, and these may not be the best Urza Saga decks, but ones that I find use it the most. Amulet Titan may use it for not only creating constructs and threats, but also to grab their Amulet of Vigor, but I will not be mentioning that. Affinity is what I want to go with, because it can grab Mishra's Baubles, it can grab Mox Opals, Welding Jar as a protection piece, Lava Spur Boots as a way to gain haste on a creature. So maybe if you create a construct that turn, you pay 1 with your Urza Saga, you're tapping, you're functionally paying 1, and then the 2 to create the construct. If you have another mana, you can then pay to have that construct that you created on that turn, give it haste with the Lava Spur Boots. You're already attacking in with something that's Ward 1. Ward 1, surprisingly powerful in a format full of tempo interactions. Shadow Spear, very relevant as a way to remove indestructible from different creatures. I actually really like this because in the Legacy and Vintage formats where you have something like Dark Depths, when you have Merit Lodge coming out, you can actually remove the indestructible from it. So I really like Shadow Spear as an option in those formats, but having Trample and Lifelink is just extremely relevant anywhere in a format creating large, kind of creating large tokens. Mox Opal, as I mentioned. Springleaf Drum, this one's a little bit rare, but if you happen to not have your colored sources, this can be really relevant. And Soul Guy Lantern as that piece that ends up being like a graveyard hate piece, but if you need a way in a pinch at the end game to just draw a card, this card's also fantastic. So this is a great way to just kind of cycle that away. Now, notably, the targets that I always want to point out for many of you, you may not actually have played against Urza Saga as commonly or played with it as commonly. So the one thing I always like to point out is that you search your library for a card with mana cost 0 or 1. It's not, 1 or less or anything like that. So notably, the best example is you can't grab Portable Hole with this. It literally has to cost 0 colorless or 1 colorless. It cannot cost 1 CMC, which again, that's what Portable Hole is, but Portable Hole costs 1 white. So you're not able to get that. You have those restrictions and it's balanced accordingly. If you were to able to grab Portable Hole with something like Urza Saga and anything more, this card would be banned quicker than, this card would probably have been banned quicker than Treasure Cruise at that point. I hope it would have been. This card would be absolutely insane. When it comes to something like Hammer Time, we can see it, have even more playability. For example, it can grab Ginger Brute as an unblockable threat. It can grab the Colossus Hammer, the namesake card of the deck. Again, the Shadow Spear. It can also grab Springleaf Drum. So it has a couple more options outside of Ornithopter in decks like this. Again, grabbing the Colossus Hammer and also Ginger Brute, showing some of the flexibility. And then you have like sideboard pieces, right? Like you have Pithing Needles, Relic of Progenitus, namely in this deck because it doesn't necessarily care about its graveyard. You have a whole variety of options. And if I even go to the Legacy Painter deck that I've been playing more often, you have not only Lotus Petal, not only Lava Spur Boot, Soul Guy Lantern, as I mentioned, Pithing Needle, sometimes more options out of the sideboard as well. I personally do like including the Shadow Spear, as I mentioned, but Grindstone is the key piece. This is why Urza Saga is staple in this deck. You aren't able to grab the Painter Servant, but Grindstone is 1, so just you can afford to play less copies and then play an Urza Saga strategy, creating kind of these mid-range pieces, these great uncounterable threats, and then ultimately be able to threaten to play out of Grindstone on Suspend too. So a lot of power in this. But when it comes to these tutor targets, because we're very specific in them, we can find them actually pretty easy. If you do a quick Scryfall search with the right kind of limitations, you can find your options relatively well. So for example, you want to look at cards that are artifacts, cards that specifically have a CMC of 0, but cost 0. Right, so when you look at that, there's only 20 cards out of here. There's not many options that you're going to find out of this one. Paradise Mantle for the Cheerios decks is very relevant. You could grab Tormod's Crypt, Welding Jar, as I mentioned. Zurin Orb is a more interesting one. Zurin Orb, probably not as common. You're probably thinking of this more so in like the vintage decks where maybe you want to grab it to combo with something like Fast Bond and some type of card that allows you to play cards from graveyards. So you could like play a fetch land, fetch out your whole deck, play that land from your graveyard with Fast Bond, and then always net on life because or be even on life because the Fast Bond will make it so any land you play past the first, you lose 1 life. The fetch land, you lose 1 life, but then you can sacrifice the lands eventually to just gain a bunch of life as well. So you can always just net or even out on life that way. So that's really fantastic there. But when it comes to the 1 artifacts that cost 1 with the cost of 1, then you get more interesting because you have 288 cards. So these are the cards that I'm specifically going to be looking at as options that you may want in your general Urza Saga strategy. So hold on to your butts. Let's go at number 1, Ghost Vacuum. This notably does see play. It has seen a lot more play, notably in the legacy formats pre-ban, where Dimir Reanimator was more common, and so this was actually a good way to not only just exile whole graveyards. You didn't necessarily care about the whole graveyard, you cared about specific cards. You would exile a specific card from a graveyard, and then you could pay 6 and reanimate it on your own. So each creature exiled with it, you'd be able to return. It comes in with a flying counter on it, is a 1/1 spirit, so it's not necessarily the most threatening thing, but a lot of those cards that you're able to reanimate are like Atraxa, Gristle Brand, something like that, like some type of card that has a really good immediate effect or a really good activated ability. You're not necessarily worried about like the whole power toughness aspect of it. So Ghost Vacuum is great there. There is some level of play of this card in Modern, I believe. It's just not the most relevant thing in the world, but if there is like a reanimator strategy that becomes more relevant, I'm thinking something like Goryo's Vengeance, then Ghost Vacuum is going to become even more and more relevant as a way for you to steal things. Obviously, you got to be a deck that can also pay this cost. So we've seen this in some artifact-based strategies that use Urza Saga. having 6 is a very niche thing. So again, more so played in Legacy where you have soul lands, you have a lot more kind of busted ramp as in terms of modern power scaling busted ramp. So you can actually get to this 6, might have a bit more, you know, niche play in modern, but still a relevant Urza Saga target, especially one that came out recently. Next one is going to be Vexing Bauble, banned in Legacy, restricted in Vintage, rightfully so in those 2 formats. Modern, a little bit less relevant. Whenever a player casts a spell, if no mana is spent to cast it, counter it, so that counts for you as well. But this card is really relevant in turns where maybe you're going off with a combo and you need to be able to protect yourself from not only Force of Negation, but maybe something like Force of Vigor. If you're playing Urza Saga, you're getting out stuff like this, you are probably a deck that cares about Force of Vigor or other kind of free spells, maybe something like Subtlety. So if you're playing against a deck or a metagame or in a metagame where the elementals or a lot more free spells are more relevant, then something like Vexing Bauble is going to be really powerful. This is a card that, especially with its recent banning in Legacy and its restriction in Vintage, should not only hint to its power level, but what can be done with this. And what's great is that in that whole avenue of acting like Soul Guide Lantern, if you don't need the free aspect of it, like countering that stuff, like Soul Guide Lantern, you don't need the graveyard piece, you can just have it enter, sacrifice it, draw a card in a pinch. If you have an Urza Saga that's going away, you need more resources, you're running out of cards, this card can just cycle away and give you that optionality. So Vexing Bauble is great for that. Number 3 is going to be Mishra's Research Desk. Now, notably, this actually is seeing a fair amount of play every so often in the Temur Breach decks, but more so I've been seeing it played in Legacy. So I wanted to kind of shift that note over for the modern players here. This isn't relevant in all strategies. This is going to be more so relevant in the combo decks that are looking for something a bit more immediate. So again, the Temur Breach players are playing it, but it's a great option to look through various parts of your deck to look for something specific. Mishra's Research Deck 1, you can pay 1, tap it, sacrifice the Research Desk, exile the top 2 cards of your library, choose one of them. Until the end of your next turn, you may play that card. And then you can pay 1 and a colorless to kind of unearth it, bring it back, and to repeat the process. This is notably a 3 mana effect to just try and find a card. You still have to be able to cast that card. Notably, it says you can play that card, so it can allow you to exile lands and play those lands. So that's also very relevant. So if you get out a Urza Saga, that's gone. If you play this, you can exile an Urza Saga and play that Urza Saga. That's also really relevant. And also the relevancy with Karn the Great Creator also can't be understated here. Exiling the top 2 cards of your library. Notably, Karn can grab cards out of exile, so artifacts out of exile and your sideboard. So if there is a random artifact that you need a copy of and you're able to then exile it, you may actually be able to use Karn the Great Creator to draw 2 cards. So you have a card on layaway that you're going to be able to cast, and then the exiled card, maybe you can -2 with your Karn and grab it back if it's an artifact specifically. So Mishra's Research Deck is going to be great for that. And obviously, if you unearth it, it's going to be able to exile. You're going to be able to get it back with your Karn the Great Creator after the fact. But a lot of hyper synergy there. Again, noting the fact that, as I mentioned, someone in the comment section is going to tell me this is going to get played. I am acknowledging this gets played in Temur Breach. I am just saying there are more decks that could be taking advantage of a card like this outside of Legacy, where I find that it has a lot more play, especially in the painter strategies, which I'm running through myself. Now, the next card that I want to mention is Hex Parasite, especially with the recent unbanning of Mox Opal. Obviously, there are a tier of powerful Mox Opal decks, and it seems to be that Breach is the best one in Modern right now. Various different affinity decks are doing their best to try and kind of make their way to the top. We have had the, oh my God, that mill deck that just wants to look at the top card of your deck and then, you know, slowly grind you out of the game. That is also going to be a relevant deck. But also when it comes to the hardened scale strategies, those are decks that also have made a big way back thanks to Mox Opal. So if Hardened Scales ever becomes like super relevant, we see it maybe win a challenge, a top 8 challenge a couple of times, people are going to be picking it up a lot more. Hex Parasite is going to be even more relevant as a way to remove counters off of things. So remove X counters from target permanent. For each counter removed this way, put a 1/1, the Hex Parasite +1/+0 until the end of turn. So this is going to be a great way to pay some amount of mana, remove a bunch of counters off of creatures. And what's great about it is not only are you removing the counters, for those of you that may have never played with Hex Parasite, if you have something like an Arcbound Ravager with a bunch of counters on it, you're able to remove those counters and not kill it, or you kill it after those counters are gone. So those counters are not going to like necessarily transfer over. You can do this at instant speed. There's no restriction. So if your opponent is trying to do some counter shenanigans, if you have some mana open, they have to think of something like Hex Parasite. And honestly, it's one of those cards that really just comes out of nowhere when it comes to optionality. So again, if scales ever becomes super relevant or some type of counter strategy, I don't know, hey, if Dice Factory Tron becomes super relevant, then Hex Parasite has some game against something like that. Notably, every time you activate, you're going to be losing some amount of life, but that's kind of the point. This is like that one-shot piece. You're not meant to use it like over and over and over again. If you're using it like 3-4 times, you're probably losing anyway. You got to find yourself a win condition ASAP. The last card that I want to talk about is that anti-mill tech, that graveyard shuffle. But also, you know, look, it can gain you some amount of life as well. This is probably in the sideboard of your Karn decks anyway as a one of, if you expect mill to be really problematic. 2's tap, you gain 5 life, shuffle Elixir of Immortality into your graveyard. You know, their owner's library and everything. So if you're to steal it, it goes back to them. Elixir of Immortality, I just want to shout out as a card that I always randomly see playing mill, that I'm always shocked that people are still playing. Obviously, primarily getting played in the Karn wish boards, as I mentioned, but every so often I have played against this in. I played against this against Urza Saga, and it hurts me so much to see this as a tutor target. So I will always mention it as a hate piece against mill that Urza Saga players can play. There are other more relevant pieces. You probably just want to be, you know, kind of, again, getting something like a Lava Spur Boots, putting that onto the Saga token that you just made, giving it haste and coming to attack into the mill player. But it has some relevancy. You know, if the mill player somehow has resolved an Ensnaring Bridge against you and you just can't rely on large construct tokens, Elixir of Immortality is definitely going to give you the time you need to shuffle back in and maybe find that exile target artifact or enchantment type of piece that you're looking for. But these are the Urza Saga targets that I think are surprisingly relevant, have that niche play, but I think always should be in the back of your mind in terms of optionality. There's a ton more options as well. There's a lot of cool funky equipment that also exists. Like I'm thinking of like there's that one equipment, it costs 1, but you can pay 3 to like equip it onto a planeswalker, and the planeswalker becomes a creature as well. Like there's a lot of cool things that you can get that have relevancy, maybe not even in just in constructed formats, but if you're looking for like one of Urza Saga tutor targets in your EDH deck, then there's a lot of cool options as well. So let me know what you think in the comment section down below. What is your favorite Urza Saga target, and what is your favorite use for Urza Saga? Are you more so on the side of like this is a great tutor target, or have you just had more success creating construct tokens? Because I'll tell you what, even though I've been playing Painter and Legacy, I've had so much more success just creating construct tokens and swinging in. The card just, again, making quote unquote uncounterable threats is really relevant. The card's really powerful, but I think it's like balanced in many ways too. There's a lot of like really easy hate for it, and a lot of ways to stop what it needs to do. And especially in the older formats where you're playing stuff like Wasteland, there's a lot of ways to handle it. In the modern format, maybe the targets aren't as powerful based on like the cards being played. So maybe one day it gets banned. For now, I actually think it's like relatively fine. It's a really cool piece for modern, but let me know what you think in the comment section down below.